Deputy Henderson, I don't know what you, he says, I don't know what you did to be able to piss off my officers. And that was the lowest moment of my life.
I'm Matt Handy, and you're listening to My Last Relapse. So, tell me about yourself.
So, one of those questions that I always try to figure out how to properly answer.
Okay. What was your childhood like?
What was my childhood like? I grew up in the inner city of Houston, so on the outskirts of Fifth Ward area.
Like north side of it?
North side of town. Single mother, 3 other siblings, one of which is a handicap.
Okay.
Was born blind, and actually he had his 48th birthday yesterday, so I was at my mother's house, and so, we're still taking care of him and doing the family thing there, but I had to grow up a lot faster than most kids, so there was a lot of responsibility and weight on my shoulders that I didn't really recognize as a child, but it was just, the thing to do, that type of thing of having to be home and being that quote unquote latchkey kid, where I had to be able to kind of step into the position of or take on responsibilities that the average child really didn't have to take on at a very young age. So I would say that it was a blessing and a curse at the same time, because, sometimes you don't get the opportunity to properly enjoy your childhood the way that you would like. But I felt like later in life it was something that I look back on and I can say I was appreciative of it, because most people, they didn't mature in certain areas or whatever until, later in life, and I had to take on those responsibilities as a kid. So, yeah. Okay,
single parent?
So, yeah, single parent. Mother, worked a lot of, in and out jobs, hourly jobs, things of that nature, but did what she needed to do to be able to lay the foundation for us. And so she was great in the area of the spiritual side of things. Sometimes I think, it probably could have been equated to almost being too religious sometimes, but always I'm thankful that foundation was laid, at that particular time, because it helped me to recognize, and one of the things that I always say is that, when I look at life as itself, many times we feel like that this is just it, the in and out of getting, going to work and taking care of family. But I think many times we all as humans have had these moments of, feeling like there's something more to this existence. And so I believe that's the spirit that's on the inside of us. So, she did that at a very young age for all of us, and sitting down doing Bible study. And, she was a piano player, so in the younger years, she played piano for Lakewood Church back when, before, Pastor Joel, it was Pastor John Osteen, his father. Yeah. And then, went over to play over for some different ministries and things of that nature. But, I would say it was still fun. But it was also moments where there was hardship. There were moments where, we didn't have a lot because my father did not play a significant role in our lives at all. I could count on my hand how many times I probably saw him when I was a kid. Thankful that I had an opportunity to establish somewhat of a relationship later in life. But, he passed, it's been 4 years now, probably like a few days ago or so. But it was just, me growing up fairly fast and, not necessarily knowing who I was as a young man or as a teenager, but I was surrounded with, a lot of men at church. So I was thankful for that. Of course, they can't replace, a father being there, but at the same time, they were supplemental in certain areas. So I got an opportunity to learn certain, trades, and there were certain men at church that I can attribute to certain skills that I have as far as like learning how to wax a floor. And, certain men had certain, businesses where we go out and clean, other establishments. So I learned a lot from some of these men where responsibility and taking care of family and, just being able to make an income and them showing me that, it can be done. I think that's ultimately what led me to go into entrepreneurship, even myself, is just seeing, taking something that that you might be gifted at doing and recognizing that I can actually monetize this because it's something that I truly believe that God has placed on the inside of every one of us. But a lot of times we don't recognize what that gift is. It's like we're still navigating life trying to figure out what our purpose is. But the more and more that we can internalize and look within on the inside of us and identify what that is, then we can see that, okay, well, God has gifted me with this. Even if you're working a 9 to 5, I believe that he's gifted everybody with something. You know, it might not necessarily be in the area of entrepreneurship, but you might have the gift of, you know, just being this overly loving person, and the gift of being able to encourage somebody and to be able to help them to, you know, see life in a better, you know, through a better lens, you know. So, so childhood and teenage years and all of that, you know, were fairly good, you know, outside of just those struggles of not having the financial, you know, resources and things that you know, everybody else had back in those days. You know, I'm 45, so this was around the time that starter jackets and, you know, the J's and certain clothing and yeah, and I don't know if, like, you know, the teens now, like, I don't recall, like, my son, who's currently at UT Austin, he never was necessarily big into, like, materialistic stuff, but I don't know if teens of today are still the same way. But I know back in those days, it's like if you didn't have this and have that, then you just weren't necessarily a part of the in crowd per se. You know, polo shirts and, you know, I couldn't afford any of that type of stuff. Like, a lot of my clothes, even in high school, were hand-me-downs. Mm-hmm. And but I, you know, pieced them together as best as I could, and, you know, kind of rocked out from there.
And so, how did that lead you into whatever you're doing today?
I would say that a lot of my childhood and teenage years positioned me for everything that I'm doing right now, because I recognize through everything that I've done, whether it be from being a Boy Scout, and I always say, you know, when I think about the TV show, you know, Boys in the Hood, I was a Boy Scout in the hood. I couldn't afford the actual uniform, so my mom pieced together the uniform, and from the thrift store or whatever, you know, some Goodwill or something like that. And there was always this passion that I had for serving other people. I remember a situation where there was the elementary school I went to, Ryan Elementary, which is no longer an active school, in the HISD system. I was trying to earn my merit badge for food service. And so me being a 8-year-old kid, I did not recognize that, I didn't recognize that other people were, like, really just as, like, even more impoverished than what my family was. Yeah. You know, it was, you know, my mom, you know, there were moments where we were on food stamps and things of that nature, but she did what she could to where I don't feel like I really just truly felt the effects of it. Like, oh, I wish I had this. Like, she just made us feel like, you know, she was taking care of things. But I remember knocking on an elderly lady's door, and, you know, and I started with my little spiel about trying to get some canned goods, and she kind of looked at me and she was like, well, baby, you need to be giving me some canned goods. And I realized that, you know, a lot of people were just in these positions where they just didn't have a lot, and the whole neighborhood and just area was the same way. So I would say that many of those situations there, and seeing that, and seeing a lot of people that were strung out on drugs and just a lot of different things, where I think that foundation of service is where it became established. And then also I think church became that other avenue that led me into this. So I was very active in church, with the youth ministry and the dance team, and serving with the, you know, with any, you know, department, the choir. I sang a lot. So I believe that all of that led to doing those type of things, and then just being around some of the men, seeing them serve with their families, I believe is what ultimately led to this. And then eventually ROTC in high school and things of that nature. So I
right, you were in the military, right?
I was, okay. Yeah, correct. I was Army as well, and served 8 years in the Army, did one deployment in Iraq, 2003 when, wow. You know, when that whole thing popped off. So that was quite interesting in itself. But I think the biggest question that I always had was, like, what is my purpose in this existence? What is my purpose in life? And to be honest with you, like, even into my latter years, that still was a question of my mind. Because, you know, as a young teenager, I was always being told that I was going to be a pastor. Mm-hmm. Because for whatever reason, like, I would go to these different ministries and people would prophesy and say that, you know, they see this in me. And so I started thinking to myself, like, what is this all about? But at the same time, I didn't really sense that that's what I was going to be. I did believe in my heart that there was something different about me, because it it was odd how some of these situations would happen. I think about, being a part of this and picture me being like in all white with like a sequence gold belt on, like dancing and doing all this stuff. And then the minister from the very front comes to the very back of the church and singles me out of everybody that's around. And I'm only like 14 years old. And says some things about me and who I am as a person and what God is sharing with her about my life and about the direction that I'm going to do. And it was all service related. And so I look in my later years, probably mid-30s, late 30s, somewhere around there, I started thinking like, man, I said, this is what my calling is. My calling is in the area of service. And so for some that might be isolated to one specific thing. Like I'm called, like some people might be called to nursing and some people might be called to law enforcement. I didn't believe that mine was in one specific area. I've done law enforcement. I've done the military. I believe that for me, it's always been, where does God want me at now at this moment? And that moment might end because there are many times where there are certain chapters that close. And we have to learn how to recognize, honestly, when a shift has happened in our lives, because as much as we might desire to remain stationary because, contentment can set in and you can get to a place where it's like, man, I'm comfortable here. But I believe that the Most High knows that there's greater in the inside of us, and many times we don't see it. And so he will allow us to remain in a certain position many times, but then there are sometimes that it's like, okay, I'm trying to get you to recognize that the shift is taking place and you are resistant to it. That shift is taking place many times in my life, but that shift is taking place in the form of terminations.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And for the next person, it might be something different, but for me, I used to always question like, man, like I wish I would have, like a career in a certain area, 20 years or 30 years. And I can look back at my life and say, man, I've done this, but everybody's trajectory is different. So I'm looking at somebody else's life and how they've been, consistent in a certain profession for X amount of years and comparing it to mine, not realizing that the path that God wants for me is very different. Now, maybe certain choices, deviated me from going certain places, but I also believe I had to recognize that, when doors close in our lives, it's not always a bad thing, the way that we many times see that it's a bad thing. It many times it could be the hand of God closing that door, and it might come through the form of a termination. And so because you only see it as, man, I can't believe I got terminated, because nobody wants to be terminated. Like I've even been in positions as a manager where I've had to let people go, and it's not a good feeling. So I think about, if that's happened with me a significant amount of times, like what is wrong with me that I can't keep a job? I go somewhere and I'm there for 5 years, and then I go here, and then I felt as if the spirit in the inside of me was saying, your path and your journey is not the same as everybody else's. I'm trying to get you to a certain place, and even in the midst of it, what's happening is character development is taking place. If you allow it to take place, because what you could do is you could process that, you could become
like resentful.
Yeah, very resentful, because there was a time period that I was, and I'll be very honest with you that I was, and I'll give you one example. When I was with the sheriff's department, and that job was ripped away from me, and it shouldn't have been, because there were other people that, like, I think about all of the officers and deputies that are on the beat right now that probably don't deserve to be on the street. Mm-hmm. And here I am, a guy that I felt like I was very understanding of society, even from my deployment in Iraq and how I dealt with, the civilians there. But then I come in here and I start patrolling this area, and then I have this said about me to the point where it leads up to a termination. It gets overturned, but then I'm never able to get back into law enforcement. And then I got to the point where I felt like, okay, God, I see what you're doing. It's not meant for me to go back. And I had to recognize that chapter was closed. He allowed me to be there for a certain period to be able to learn a certain thing, but then it was now time to move on. And I kept trying to go back and fight against the grain, kind of like the salmon working upstream, and it's not leading me where I need to go, so I had to let it go. But the moment I let it go, so many other opportunities opened up. And then I had this opportunity to go to Israel shortly thereafter, and a trip that I took actually with veterans, with a group of veterans through an organization called Heroes of Heroes. And the only thing that I had to do was purchase my flight to New York. Everything else beyond that, they took care of. Housing accommodations, food and things of that nature. But it was the most amazing, and I wouldn't call it vacation, the most amazing experience that I've ever had in my life, because what it did was it brought to life the Bible in a sense, and everything that I had read when I was a child up until the time that I was an adult, and it just made it more real. But I also realized deep down inside, like this passion inside of me has always been just, how can I serve? How can I give back? And that ultimately, I believe, led me into even the position that I'm in now with West Oaks Hospital on the mental health side, and then with my business as a chef. It's always just, how can I serve? How can I be of assistance to other people? Because I identified something when I was going through that struggle of not having, staying in this position X amount of years and being terminated here and all of this, is that I believe God said on the inside, it's like, I need you to serve. And so I remember it was like I didn't have a lot of money, and I got some food together, got some bottled water. And this is at the time my son was like, maybe 8 years old. And then I had my two nephews, they were like my sons prior to me having my son. And we went downtown and we just started serving folks, passing out water. Some people were reluctant because, we're in a society now, and I get it, where, kindness it's kind of almost like, all right, what's the catch? Like, what do I have to do? I was watching a funny video online the other day, and a guy was, he's a comedian, but he's always, but I think he's fairly wealthy because of some oil and some other stuff, and he just goes around doing kind gestures for people, and most of the time people are very taken aback, because we've gotten to the place where serving other people and doing it from a place of genuineness is obscure.
Yeah, there is a complete lack of altruistic service.
Yeah. So it's how can we get back to that? It's how the Creator made us. It's on the inside of us, but many times we stifle that feeling because we also still, with that same nature of wanting to serve and give, we also have the selfish mentality too. And I think that's just human nature. And many times, and not to over spiritualize it, but I believe that's the significance of being connected to what many would probably say is that higher power. I always say God is love ultimately. So if God is love, and He's the foundation, He's the beginning, He's the end, He's all of these different things, then when we think about our flesh, which is of a nature where it wants to be selfish, and many times you want to be able just to me, but the more and more you recognize, the more I give, you really do open up the door more to receive. And that becomes evident through the parable in the Bible about the sower, and this person had this and this, and who held this. The more and more that we give, the more and more that we receive. And so I just want to be in a position where, for myself, has always been, God, I want to be I think we all desire to be blessed in life. And many times we equate blessings to
having things.
I don't believe that blessings are having things. I believe those are the byproducts of being blessed. I believe that the blessing is what He has on the inside of you, because He's giving you the ability to obtain whatever that thing is you want. So, of course, God wants us to all, be well off and have certain things and to live and, where just have whatever that accommodation might look like. For one person, it could be a house, with just a 1-bedroom apartment or whatever it might be. But the thing is we lose sight and we think that the blessing is the material thing, and it's not. The blessing is what He's placed on the inside of you that you can serve to mankind. And then in turn, through whatever they purchase from you or however it goes, that's how the byproducts come about. So we misappropriate what truly being blessed is. It's like, I feel like I'm blessed because, God, I recognize that you've gifted me with something. Now, how do I identify that on the inside, and then I give it to the world? If I never give it, and the way I look at a blessing again is it's like a gift, but it's a gift that needs to be served. Mm-hmm. And if I never actually go within and then I never serve it to mankind, is it really a gift? If I say to you right now, man, I got you a gift, but it's in the car right now, and I never give it to you before I leave here, then technically it's not a gift, because a gift is meant to be given. And so I believe that what God placed on the inside of us is meant to be given. But what we do is we like to hoard it for ourselves and think that it's, and then that puts us into that self, that mentality of, well, look at me and I'm this. And it's like, well, no, you got to recognize that what he's placed on it. Yes, you're talented. Yes, you're this, but it's meant to serve other people. Mm-hmm. And that's how the world really is that we're all here. Even with me feeling like, I'm not necessarily an outgoing person and I like to keep to myself many times, it's more of we're all here to serve one another. In some capacity, some shape, form, or fashion, we're all here to serve one another. But many times we don't see that because it's always every man for themselves type thing. And so, my hopes is that, through what I believe that he's gifted me with, in whatever capacity, whether it be the gift of cooking, the gift of singing, the gift of serving the homeless, or whatever it might be, how can I plant a seed that's ultimately going to render, a harvest in somebody else's life? Like I might not see it the moment that I plant it, but somebody else, you might come along and do something, a kind gesture for somebody that waters that seed that ultimately brings about, a harvest in that person's life. And we don't know that one thing that we planted could change the trajectory of somebody's life, because that's how God designed us, is that we all here. Like I believe God works, as much as we say God is a higher power and that he's all this and he can do everything without us, I believe that that's true, but I also believe that God desires to work through mankind, through the things that we do on this earth, and we just have to be sensitive through our spirits to be able to allow that to happen. And so that means you have to stay connected as best as possible to where you're not always thinking selfishly. And sorry if I get long-winded.
No, you're good. You're good. What was Israel like?
Israel was a journey like no other. I know we started down south in Tel Aviv, and then we worked our way up basically through the journey of the footsteps of Jesus. And it was pivotal in so many ways, because I saw the Spirit of God work actually in one of the veterans that was there. And, we found out in the process of all of this that his brother had committed suicide. And
while you guys were there?
Well, not while we were there. I think maybe a year prior to him taking his trip. We found out his brother, had committed suicide.
Also a service member or no?
He was a service member as well, yes.
The brother?
The brother was, yes. The brother was a service member as well. And so we take this, we're getting ready to get baptized in the River of Jordan. But this one veteran that's, before we found the story out, he's only taking a trip because it's like, it's more of a free trip. It's not really like I want to get the experience of Israel from a spiritual standpoint. And so everybody had their various different reasons why, but the premise of the organization was to be able to not necessarily indoctrinate you into Christianity, but to expose you, basically. But he was making a lot of jokes, like even from the white gowns that we had to wear. And he was kind of like, it was almost to the point where it was pissing me off, where it's like you're making a mockery of something that I deep down believe in my heart is true. And I can respect the fact that you might be an atheist or you don't believe in God. But the crazy part about this is that he decided he was going to get baptized.
Yeah.
But he's just doing it because he wants to get the robe. And you can tell that he's literally saying this, I just want the robe. So he gets in the water, and interesting thing is he tells one of the lead people that's a part of our group that I don't want the minister that's in the water to baptize me. He says, I want you, he wants the lead guy to baptize him. And so while he's sitting in the water, he shares the story with the lead veteran that's going to baptize him, because he's actually he was a licensed minister. Mm-hmm. And come to find out that the name of his brother was the same name of the veteran that's baptizing him. So it became a really healing moment for him at that moment, where he literally breaks down in the River of Jordan, sobbing, and came out a new individual. But had that moment, even through the mockery of what he was doing, like I always feel like the Spirit of God is always after us, is always seeking after us, no matter what state we're in, even when we're at our lowest moments in life. I believe that the Spirit is always seeking after us, and deep down inside, we just have to get to a place where we can answer what it is we're feeling. So Israel became just that freeing moment of really seeing the Bible come to life. And to, now, to go to the there was the pool of Bethesda, where the if you touch the healing waters, so to physically see the pool of Bethesda and to see the place where they said this is the tomb that, Lazarus came from. And it's, in some places might have been, adjusted. And of course they still had, people selling things and trying to make money off of it, but no different than when you think about in the Bible, when Jesus went into the temple and started tearing stuff up because people were trying to profit, off of
the money changers.
All the money changers, yeah. So that was going to be, but I would say for me that it just became a journey in the healing, because healing to me is a continual thing. So for myself at that particular time, it was what I needed, because there were so many moments, I'll be honest with you, man, that, I dealt with a lot of suicidal thoughts, from my post-military, yes. And even when I was at the sheriff's department, there was a moment where I thought about death a lot.
Yeah.
Like, you coming from Iraq, it's already there because it's in the forefront of your mind. Like, man, I don't want to get killed.
Yeah.
But then now when you start and you come back into society and now you start patrolling the streets of Houston and you're seeing.
What part of Houston were you in?
When I first started patrolling, I patrolled District 3, which is the east side of Houston. So that's the North Shore, Channelview, Baytown. They consider down south like the Galveston, Clear Lake area. So they're areas that are unincorporated parts of Harris County in that area. So I patrolled there first, and then I went to Highway 6 and Clay Road, which is District 4. Then from there I became a contract deputy. So that was kind of like a very chill, spot. So I used to just go out and help out the other guys and other beats that were dealing with stuff. But you're seeing suicides and homicides. And so all of this is like, it's downloaded into your system. And, when you really look at it, the human mind, it's not meant to try to handle all of that. And so you have to learn how to be able to, decompress and offload and all that. But most of the time you didn't. You just went from job to job, job to job, job to job. Yeah. And then once you get home, it's like it becomes overload, because you've seen so much. And so for myself, it became even more overwhelming because I just couldn't shake this idea of death. And then that was around the time that I was still dealing with a lot of night tremors and things of that nature from waking up in the middle of the night because, of our FOB, or, what they consider a forward operating base in Iraq, used to come under artillery attack quite a bit.
What base was this?
I was in my mind just goes blank, Abu Ghraib in West Baghdad.
Wow.
So I was in one of the hot spots in Iraq. And then we had some teams that were in Fallujah, which, became very, popular in the news. But, you think about that, we come to find out later that one of our first translators was actually a spot. So, of course, he gets arrested. We got to, deal with him. And then we took on another translator, which a guy named Hyder, loving guy. And him and I are connected on Instagram, and he's now living in the States with his family. But a lot of the translators at that time, as he should be, because America had promised a lot of things for these translators, but unfortunately, many of them didn't even make it back alive. Yeah. Many of them got killed because once we pulled out, that was just it for a lot of them. So many of them had to try to flee as best as possible. But when you're trying to manage all of those different things, the human body just becomes overwhelmed with the idea of things. And so for me, I realized that I just struggled in that area. And a lot of times I just kept compiling things and just putting things over the top of things and not properly dealing with it. And I still really had not properly dealt with things moving forward, thinking that, cooking became, therapeutic. And it is, and it still is to this day. But I also realized that I needed to be able to talk to someone. And that's when, I started seeing someone at the VA and, but then I didn't like the group therapy. So then I dropped out of that. And I'm like, I don't really want to talk about this because it's almost like, with veterans, especially when you get veterans from different campaigns of war from, you got some guys from, Desert Storm and Desert Shield. Then you got some OEF guys. And then you got some Vietnam guys. Everybody got their war story. So it's kind of like you're competing. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to sit in here and just listen to y'all try to compete about whose gun was bigger. Yeah. But.
Did you ever have any substance use issues?
I would say at one point in time, I started drinking more.
In the military?
Actually, I didn't drink until I got out. Well, no, I will say this. I started drinking while we were in Fayetteville, North Carolina at Fort Bragg. That's when I first started drinking. So keep in mind, like I told you, I grew up in a Christian home, and so that was never a desire of mine.
Yeah.
I had no desire to drink. I had no desire to do any of that. I mean, of course, I kind of wanted to go out with friends and go to clubs, but my mama wouldn't allow that to happen. So, everything that I did was youth ministry driven. But after Iraq, that's when I realized that I started going out and I started drinking and I started going out to clubs. And I think that's, when I think about the term addiction, I used to always say to myself, because I feel like I have control of it. Mm-hmm. Well, just because you feel like you have control of it don't necessarily mean that you're not addicted. Okay. I think that there are, different levels, again, to addiction. Like from what I do right now with West Oaks, I'm on the business development side, but I sit in on a lot of these sessions and I just like to listen and learn. And that's when I started realizing, Edwin, you are addicted. Because if you ever feel the need to, when I get home from a long day of work, that I got to have a drink, that's an addiction. You might just only have one or two drinks, but it's this craving or this desire that, or this impulse that you get where it's like, okay, well, I have to have this to be able to relax. And when you feel like you have to have something to be able to relax, then you might want to take a look at what you're doing, because then now for some, it might go a little bit further and to the point where it becomes really bad and you're just not able to control and manage life. But I believe that for myself, it became that thing where I realized, dang, when you really, if you go back and look at your timeline from when you got back from Iraq, there really hasn't been a week that you haven't had a drink. You might have had like one or two during the middle of the week and then you didn't have any more. But the reality is that you feel like you just kept, doing it. So I had to start recognizing the scale back on that and make some major changes in that area. And then when you're in the food industry and then you're cooking and, I used to have like liquor and everything sitting on the shelf in my living room because I just bought it all in advance because I didn't want to have to go to the store when I'm doing, catering events. And I had to remove that because just the very sight of it, like I felt like it was there, so it was easily accessible. And it's like, okay, no, you need to put this into a tote. It needs to be put away until you have an event. But I had to make some major adjustments because that's what I did. It was going out to the club, it was drinking, and I realized it wasn't leading me down the path that because there were moments where, it was interrupting my sleep. I'm already dealing with PTSD-related issues, and now I'm thinking that me taking this drink is going to help me, and it's not. It's really not. Like, and I think deep down inside we know certain things aren't the best for us, but we still do it because we think at that moment it's going to help us to be able to ease whatever it is we're dealing with. So,
yeah. So it was military, then the sheriff's office?
Military, then the sheriff's office, and I was with the sheriff's department about 5.5 years. I started working in the jail first, so of course back at that time you had to, be a detention officer. And
was it 2 years?
Well, actually at that time it could have been a year at the time, but I think it just depended upon when the next academy would come up. Oh. So for myself, I end up waiting about maybe 2.5 years because Commissioner's Court was doing some janky stuff to where we were only having about one academy a year. There were a lot of people that were going over to University of Houston downtown because there was a loophole where if you got your T-close certification to be a police officer, that you could come back and patrol or work with the county.
Go straight to the streets.
But it was just a thing of, if you're doing it at UHD, you're not getting paid like the same way that you would go to an academy for Harris County or HPD or larger agencies. So most guys that were doing that route, they were working full time at the jail and they were going to school, on the law enforcement side in the academy. And I'm like, I don't really want to go that route, So at the time, I was just working as a detention officer. Going to school, I decided to enroll back in school, so I wanted to finish my degree. So I started going to San Jack, on the east side of town, and just waited for my opportunity. And then an opportunity presented itself, and then it got pulled away because I ended up, if I'm not mistaken, if I had a family member or somebody that had gotten locked up. And it was a situation where I had gotten the authorization to go and visit that person. And, of course, they said, well, you're going to have to take off your detention officer shirt because you don't want to look like an informant or that person is looking this way. But it backfired on me because there was a lieutenant. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was a prick. And, he found out that I'm actually visiting this family member. He pulls me out. Or he asked one of the officers to pull me out, and pulls me into his office. And so, of course, I'm extending to him all the pleasantries the same way that I would talk to an officer if I was in the military. I'm standing there, hands behind my back, parade rest, yes, sir, no, sir. And he's just, hammering away, talking reckless. And I said something. At that moment, there's a side of me where I don't care if you're an officer or not. Like, there's a defiant side of me where I feel like if you're going to disrespect me, then I'm going to say what I have to say. And so, still talking at parade rest, but I said what I said because I'm like, I don't understand why you're pulling me away from this visit when I had already just, got the authorization from the captain, but now you're telling me I can't do it. And,
Who was his superior?
That was his superior. But because he just didn't like the way that it looked, he now takes it away from me. So lo and behold, that pulls me away from going to that academy class because I was already on there. So he did whatever he did to get me removed from that class, and I had to wait. Mm-hmm. And then eventually I get the opportunity to go, and then I get on the beat. But then, of course, while I'm on patrol and doing my thing, had two different situations take place in life that ultimately one involved alcohol. Now, I wasn't drunk or inebriated, but the two officers claimed that I was, and then they said that I tried to assault a police officer.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, like, I've never in my life tried to assault anybody. And then I also said, well, I know you all got video camera. This establishment had videotape. And I said, if you pull the videotape, I said, I can assure you that it's going to show that I didn't do the stuff that you said that I did. I just know it.
Videotape disappears.
Videotape was distorted. They provided it, but in the investigation situation, like, they literally showed me as the aggressor. So it wasn't one of those fluid type cameras. It was a CC, TV, like it showed the shots.
Like 10 seconds
yeah,
here,
exactly.
10 seconds
So
there.
all they showed was me walking towards the officer, and then they painted the picture that I was the one that was aggressive, and I approached him, and I said, well, no, I wasn't. I said what took place was I was approaching him, asking him, like, why are you talking to me reckless? Because he had already first came by. I showed my credentials. Had the car started, was waiting on a buddy of mine because it was another actually deputy that was with me, and him and I had both met there. And I'd already identified myself. He drives off. He comes back a few minutes later. And so
they were on the clock and you weren't?
Yeah, correct. But they were pulling EJs, so they were doing extra jobs. Mm-hmm. So they were basically in an unmarked, white Jeep Cherokee, but that establishment had an HPD substation that was on site. Okay. And so they're doing their job there. And I said, like, I get it. I understand because I at the time I was working several EJs across the city of Houston. So, and then I also have a respect level, for other agencies, even though there was always this contention between HPD and the county and,
jurisdictional contention.
Exactly. So I rocked with it, but unfortunately, he was just a very disrespectful officer. And lo and behold, I found myself face first in the ground, in the gravel of the pavement. His knee is in my neck. I had my off-duty weapon. My off-duty weapon in my back, in my waistband. And next thing you know, he's taunting me while I'm on the ground. And he's like, you're going to lose your fucking job. And just starts, oh, you're drunk and you're this and you're that. And I'm like, but I'm not drunk. And then I'm pleading also because I have a titanium plate in my wrist from an accident in the military to where, like, I can only turn my hand over so far. I'm asking him, I'm like, man, can you loosen up these cuffs? Because that's one thing that officers will do when they're dealing with somebody that's defiant or whatever. They think like the person is resistant. They're gonna clench up the cuffs because they know that once that pain inflicts on you, that you're gonna be compliant.
Oh yeah.
Well, I wasn't fighting the guy, but he's now, he's just standing over me. Next thing you know, the lieutenant that's on duty, which that lieutenant at the time, fast forward, became the chief of police for HPD. Now, he's no longer there. So if you picture who I'm talking about, he stepped down once the new mayor came in because, of course, he technically got fired because the new mayor or whatever brings in his own, people. But he was the chief of police for HPD. But at the time, he was a lieutenant when I was on the beat. And he's like, Deputy Henderson, I don't know what you, he says, I don't know what you did to be able to piss off my officers. And that was the lowest moment of my life, man. That was the lowest moment because I found myself in handcuffs. Now, keep in mind, I had never been in handcuffs outside of play handcuffs when I'm a kid, playing cops and robbers. And when I went through the academy to learn how to use handcuffs and properly get them off of people and all those different things. So I'm standing there in handcuffs, and I said, and I'm talking to, again, pleasantries to an officer. I said, sir, I said, I don't know. I don't know what it is I did wrong. I said, I'm not inebriated. Because he starts telling me a story about, like, he says, you're a young deputy. He says, you might want to be very cautious about, being out drinking and this and that. And I say, you're absolutely right, sir. I understand. But he's also doing his due diligence to take care of his officers. Mm-hmm. So even though a lieutenant, once you get to that rank, that I believe that you should take an objective perspective on assessing the entire situation to find out what's going on. He did what any lieutenant would probably do, is take care of his guys first.
Yeah.
And so
they say that justice is blind, but I think she can see through that.
Oh, she absolutely can see through it. And so I end up, having basically my off-duty weapon taken from me. They kept it. They told me I couldn't drive my car that night because apparently I was publicly intoxicated. So my buddy that's with me, it's like, hey, I know I've worked with him. My buddy now is actually a lieutenant. Recently got promoted, but he's still with the agency now, and just went off patrol and went back into working in the jail. But at the time, he's like, man, I've been working with Henderson for a long time. We work double door lockdown, like he's a good guy, and they're just basically telling him to shut the hell up. Mm-hmm. You ain't got nothing to do with this. And so while I'm still, now the officer picks me up off the ground, walks me over to
the car.
Some I don't even know whose car it was he walked me over to, but he walks me over to a car, he slams me on the hood. And at that moment, I recognized, I said, I see what a lot of society sees now. Mm-hmm. Like, of course, I know that there are bad officers that are out there, but the moment that I was handled like that, like my face is bloody because, of course, again, he threw me on the ground. And what led to me being thrown on the ground is because when he approached me, and I said, why are you talking to me? I said, dude, why are you talking to me like that? I said, I've already identified myself. And he says, I don't give a fuck who you are. And so when he said that, another side of me came out. So at that moment, I'm like, well, fuck you then. And keep in mind, I don't even talk like that. Like, most of the time, if I had to say something to somebody, it's like, hey, bring your ass over here or whatever it might be. But for me to say that, like, you've got under my skin. So he didn't like the fact that I said it. And when I said it, he throws me into an arm bar, puts me on the ground, and then handles me. So
you were being aggressive.
Yeah, and I became the aggressive one at that moment. Yeah. But I say all that to say is that all of that situation that happened, although as bad as it was, not saying that scenario per se had to have happened that led me out of the sheriff's department, but I believe that God only wanted me there for a short period of time anyway.
Yeah.
And through that moment, that door closed, and although the termination got overturned to a resignation, I still wasn't able to get back in. And that's when I recognized, okay, God, you're leading me. Because in my mind, I was just going to retire from law enforcement and then go into teaching because I felt like I always loved working with teenagers and youth. So that's going to be the trajectory of my life, is I'm going to retire from, being a detective, because that was one of my biggest things. My field training officers, my FTOs, would always be like, man, you really do a great job at like getting the information, because that's really the primary job of a detective anyway. So most of the time, any homicide, suicide, or whatever that took place, I got so much information on any call that we dealt with that when the detective showed up, they didn't really have to do any work. Yeah. I literally gave them a notepad that gave them everything that they needed to be able to go and finish their job without them really having to do anything. Yeah. But that was something that I always loved. I really wanted to be a detective, and I saw myself being it, really, but I felt horrible when it got taken away. So,
yeah, so I have an extensive criminal record. Yeah. Like 3 prison terms in the California prison system. I don't know how many arrests. I mean, I couldn't even guess. Yeah. And like for the most part, criminal mentality, gang involved, like all this stuff, it was like cops I'm not talking to them. But there was always like that random cop that was able to get information. And it was never like a questioning thing. Yeah. It was like, okay, like I don't even know how they did it. But
it's a certain gift that you have without making the person feel like they're being questioned or they're under the microscope, that you just have conversation somehow, and somehow you can extract information. Yeah. And that becomes vital to the overall case.
Yeah. I never like told on myself. Well, I shouldn't say that. The last time I got arrested, the feds came and they had like all these pictures on the table, and they were like, I was like, how am I gonna get out? Like, how am I gonna lie out like myself out of this? Right. This isn't. So I was like, okay, you know what? For the first time, I'm just gonna like play ball with them and see how this works out. Right. And it turned out, it really, really benefited me to be like, yeah, that was me. This is what I did. Yeah. They were also looking for a bomb that I said I had. And so that could have turned into some other shit.
It really could have, yeah. You mentioned the term bomb. Bomb is not something to play with in today's society.
Yeah, well, also, I robbed a bank and told them that I had a bomb.
Oh, wow.
And so they were like, we don't even care about the bank. We want to know where the bomb is. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, this could turn into some other shit.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, first of all, the note said I had a bomb in my backpack. I didn't have a backpack on.
Okay.
You know, I was like, they were like, okay. You know, and it kind of like defused the whole situation. But yeah, they were like, they put one picture on the table. Like, do you know who this is? I looked at myself and I was like, no clue. They were like, really? It was like very, very obviously me.
Yeah.
And, but that was the only time that I like told on myself.
Yeah.
But it was very beneficial.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was always that cop though. It was always like, somehow got more information out of me than I ever intended to give. And it was never like integral to like a prosecution or anything, but it was like I was famous for like giving the wrong name. And there were certain cops that it would just work on.
Yeah.
Right? Because I found this name that was similar enough to mine, and I would give them my real social.
Okay.
And in California, they can't use, I don't know why this is, but they can't, maybe it's the same here too, but they can't use their social to identify people.
Oh, yeah.
And so, is that here too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I found that out, and so I'd give them my real social.
Okay.
And I would like tell them that my name was very similar, same birth date, all that stuff, but because I was born in Utah.
Okay.
So all of this like smoke and mirrors, right? But yeah, he would like get my real name out of me or something. Yeah. So yeah, I've met you before.
It was good times, man. It was definitely an experience, is what I can say. And I'm thankful, you know, when I think about my age now at 45, man. It's just, you know, I've done a lot in a short period of time, but it's also been very significant. What I would consider very impactful. I mean, of course, you know, do I believe I'm where I'm supposed to be in life? Absolutely not. But, you know, I feel like when I look back at things and some of the experiences that I've been given, and experiences that I've had just through the area of serving, and it's been good, man. I think, you know, it just makes life better. And I think, you know, there are but then I also have those dark moments. There's a tattoo that I have here that's a star. And before I got this star shaded in, it was just the outline of a star. And when I got it shaded, the meaning of it became most of the time when people see someone that might look like they're thriving in life and things look great from the outside, they don't see those dark moments that the person has. And so, and we all have them. That's what the significance of this shaded in dark star is that we're all stars because God has designed us that way. Like, we're all that, but a lot of times people just don't see the dark moments that we have, and I have a lot of them. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think, you know, especially as men, we have a lot of them. And that's been the hard part, man, is learning how to be vulnerable enough to be able to express those dark moments and also give yourself grace. Because it's you know, sometimes it becomes like this ebb and flow of like, you know, I have moments where I have my high, like after, and when I leave here, like I literally have like an appointment with, you know, on the VA side, but I'm trying to be more intentional on giving attention to my mental well-being because I know I have a lot of overwhelming moments in life where I just feel like I'm about to break down. And, you know, just thinking about it sometimes becomes overwhelming, man, because we all have them, man. And that's where I just encourage folks to, you know, really give their all in relation to themselves. Mm-hmm. As much as I share that, I always share with other folks, but I don't do it for my own self. It's like, how can I give everybody this advice? And I work in the mental health realm, and I'm not even giving myself what I need.
Yeah, a landscaper's yard is always fucked up.
It's crazy, man, and that becomes the most hurtful thing, man. It's just, you know what to do, but sometimes you don't do it, or sometimes it becomes this internal battle where, I think from the spiritual side of things, it becomes like the spirit knows what you need, but which one is stronger?
Yeah, well, so we live in a time, I know you've heard this, the epidemic of silent suffering.
Yeah.
But also, like, self cannot critique self, right? And it's really hard to look in the mirror and be fully objective about what's going on because you're yourself.
Yeah.
And so you have the ego and the built-up systems and, like, the thought processes that it's much easier to, like, look at this guy and be like, look, this is fucked up. You need to do this and this and this. And little, like... And it's the same shit, right? But also, like, men in general today, and I just had like a really, like a 3-hour podcast on this with somebody, but men today, there's multiple things that count against them, right? Like the destruction of the family unit, where a lot of young men don't have father figures in the home. So there's that. But then also, we are living in a situation today, societally, where men are just looked at as bad.
Yeah.
Like, men are bad, masculinity is bad, no healthy masculinity it exists. It's all toxic. And there's these talking points, right? And a lot of it is like downstream effects of political systems.
Right.
But yeah, the average guy today, we live, it's like we're also fed a lot of inaccurate information around being a man, right? Where it's like, we're told women want something specific about emotionally in touch men and all this stuff, and then people do it, or men do that, or give that to them, and then they're looked at like in a certain way, right? And it's like, I have a friend, they're married, and they have a very unique marriage. It isn't unhealthy in any way, but like she is submissive to her husband, right? And this isn't normal by today's standard, but like if you would transplant them to 100 years ago, this is a very average, typical relationship, right? But she says that people talk to her and they're like, how do you put up with that? Like, how do you put up with this guy? And her mindset around it is, this guy leads our home.
Yeah.
Like, he makes all the tough decisions. I have to sit back and spend his money.
Yeah.
Like, of course he's going to have the right to make these decisions and tell me what to do and tell me what not to do. And it's the whole, like, but he controls how you dress. Well, if I want to look to him for instruction and expect him to give it, then I have to respect what he says.
Yeah, for sure.
And then also, it's like a safety thing where it's like the dressing thing, this can be taken a couple different ways. My strong opinion on this is, if you're dressing provocatively and your husband tells you not to, and you still do, and something happens, that is your fault.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, but all of this stuff that I just said, controversial.
Yeah.
Right? Like, people are going to hear this and they're going to be like, oh, he hates women. Or like,
and that's the crazy part about our society now, because it's almost like we're on two different systems or standards in a sense. And so, like, even when you use that term submission, I know that's a term that gets used, even within in Christianity, where it talks about wives submit to your husbands, and so I see a lot of different podcasts and people talk about it, and I see some of the comments of the wisdom, and it's like some is positive, some is negative, but I think if we can get back to a place where we can recognize, like, God has, as men, created us as the leaders.
Yeah.
And that's the part where it's nothing against a woman, because I believe that women are a driving force, in any kind of, relationship.
They always say it, behind every great man is a strong woman, right?
But, but we also have to recognize that God created a certain structure, and when that structure is deviated away from, and then we start doing various different things, like, then we have, women that are having to, no different than like my mother, because of her, being in the single, state and being divorced, now you have to step into a more masculine role where you have to now start taking care
and raise boys.
Too.
Yeah.
And technically, no woman can raise a boy to be a young man, but women are doing it every single day. It's just we have to get back to how is God designed it, And not that we're going to be perfect by any means, but it's like, again, that example of, you know, the wife dressing provocatively and, you know, the man, it's like he should have a right. This is his wife. He shouldn't want his wife being out there, you know, now there are some men or whatever that don't care. Yeah. You know, at the end, like they because they look at, you know, their wife as a trophy piece, and so you can look however you want. But I believe that there has to be a level of tact, especially like, yes, you can look like that for me while we're at home, you know, but I don't want my wife going out and she has everything exposed. And I want you to look sexy when we go out. Yeah. But I think that there's a way of tastefully doing it that can be accomplished.
Yeah, I think what is informing people's worldviews today, and a lot of it isn't based in really anything. It's all subjective preference, right? Whereas, like, obviously your preferences are based in a moral code that's obviously based on something that has foundation, which is God, right? I forget who it is. He always says that, like, if you are not informing your worldview with God's standards, then it is 100% arbitrary.
Yeah, and you're just literally, you're doing our society right now, we live in a world where the mindset is that you can do what you want, say what you want, and not really deal with any of the consequences of it. Yeah. And that's so absolutely far from the truth. We can't do what we want. Now, of course, we live in a country where we have freedom of speech, but even freedom of speech comes with its consequences.
Right. And it also comes with, so freedom of speech is a funny one because people will point to that and be like, yeah, well, what about freedom of speech? That's limitless. Like, we could say whatever we want. No, you can't. Like, there's the one they always use is the yelling fire in a crowd at the movie theater. Yeah. You can't do that. You will get arrested for that. I know people that I don't know them, but I've heard these stories where people will, like, make threatening comments towards the president. Right. And guess who shows up the next day? Secret Service is at your door. Yep. And you could be in bumfuck Egypt. Yep. Like, they're going to show up there.
Absolutely.
Right? So words have consequences. And words are a funny construct, right? Because it's like your breath turning into reality, right? Yeah. And then there's, like, a lot of historical precedent around, like, what God did and how he created us. And, like, but so we create our realities, but then our actions very, very easily, like, can demonstrate that every action has a consequence.
Correct. Absolutely.
Today it is farther from that truth than I think it's probably ever been. Well, I should only in my lifetime for sure, which I'm only 36, you know, so, but I've lived through a lot of big changes, societal changes, because I was raised in the 90s, right? I was born in the 80s. Two different eras. Yeah. Today is very, very different.
Very.
And then you're just 10 years older. Yeah. That is a massive difference even, right? Like, I feel like your generation, my generation are super closely related as far as, like, mentality and all that stuff. But the generation right after me,
it's very disconnected. It's completely different.
Oh yeah, I was probably one of the last part of the generation that didn't have a cell phone in high school. Yeah. Right, that changed everything. Right, because now you don't have to call the girl's house and hope to God her father doesn't answer, and then have to make it through that gambit of like questions, and like social interaction is different. And ultimately what this comes down to, I think, is the dating interaction has completely deteriorated. There is no courtship anymore. Right. There's hookup culture and all this stuff. And ultimately what it does is it devalued what masculinity was. Correct. Because now there really is no reason to have traditional masculinity. Yeah. It isn't rewarded. It isn't looked at as a positive thing. And it definitely isn't like allotted for what it really is. And I think ultimately, the whole point of it is to, like, raise well-adjusted boys into men. Right. Because that's going to be who takes... My generation is about to take control of this country. Yeah. And I'm scared for that. Like, my generation is crazy. What generation are you?
I fit in I've recently found out I actually might be even considered a millennial, but I'm not. I couldn't be. I'm born in 80. So, to me, 80 is...
Oh, no, yeah, I think you are.
But... It's always been one of those things where I'm, like, on the cusp sometime. Like, maybe I'm, like, in both of them.
I'm going to tell you right now. Gen X. Okay, you missed it. It's
So it is X, and so that's what I've always thought. Yeah. But then somebody made a post the other day, and they shared a screenshot of something else. So maybe this particular screenshot was like, well, I could fit in both of them. But I'm like, I've always been a Gen Xer based on what I've known.
So generational placement for 1980 is Gen X, and that is 65 to 80.
Okay.
The generations are getting smaller too.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But so millennials historically have, I don't know if it's because we are a product of latchkey kids. We're like latchkey kids. Mm-hmm. And then, the deterioration of the family unit and all that stuff. We also lived through the drug wars when we were kids.
Right.
And then my favorite president ever, Bill Clinton. He was the man. But yeah, it's socially, societally, we're in like a really weird spot. And there's that cycle of hard times, It's like hard times create hard men create soft times create soft men create soft times create hard men. Like that whole cycle of like soft men creating soft men.
Right.
Hard men creating soft men. And we're in a soft men part of that cycle right now. And it's part of that cycle that is necessary for things to change, but it does suck because look at what's going on.
Yeah.
And then you mix in all this technology that we evolutionarily we're not supposed to have.
Yeah.
Like nobody's supposed to. We're like cyborgs now. Yeah. It's not a part of our body, but it might as well be. Functionally, it is. Access to information.
Yeah.
That is this generation after. So there's millennials, Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha. Have you looked into this generation of kids at all?
Not like in detail, but I mean I've seen them. I mean I see them on a regular. So
they're
at the hospital with some of the ones that come through to us. So
yeah. So there is a phenomenon that's happening within that generation. We're talking about 2 to 12. Right, that's that generation, right. 2 to 12. They're making informed, and they're not. It isn't because of their parents, because I am their parent. Like my generation is their parents.
Right.
They're making commitments to celibacy and like no sex before marriage and sobriety and all this stuff, and it blows my mind that like that is what's coming out of us. And really what I think it is they're pointing to us and saying, we don't want to be anything like that.
And that's a good thing, though.
It's a great thing.
And what I've seen about that, I have noticed that push a lot more. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's not even a good thing. It's a great thing because, we got to a place where it's kind of like there was a play that my son was in back when he was in high school. And I remember there was one particular line where it was just like you can do whatever you want, say whatever you want. And it was just, and that's where society was going. But to be able to know that we're getting back to a place of having some type of standard.
Yeah.
Because if we don't operate from some place of standard in our life and we're just like freely doing whatever we want, it's not going to render any good results. And so what that generation is doing, and I ultimately believe like it's bringing them back to a place of honoring who they are as humans.
Yeah. Well, okay. So for men, right? We have obligations. As men, we have obligations to society. We have obligations to our family. We have responsibilities that are dictated by those obligations. And for a little while now, we've just been taught that there is no obligation. You don't have to do anything, right? You don't have to perform. You don't have to respect people. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Like you can just do whatever you want.
Right.
And the effects of that ultimately is like a deterioration of our social contract, right? Where it's like it gets to a point where nobody is fulfilling their obligation to the generations after us.
Yeah.
And that's the most important part of it is like the generations after us, if they don't have foundational, like a foundation set by the generations in front of them, what is going to happen?
Right.
Fortunately, they're, and I do think that this is also like a ripple effect of having information like at your fingertips is it's that swing, right? Like it goes really extreme, then it comes back to like somewhere central. We swung way out here and we were just out here doing whatever, and now this generation's like kind of looking at what we're doing and going, okay, we don't want to do that.
And bringing it back in.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, man.
I do. I think it's a really good thing. It still blows my mind because they're kids.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like I said, my generation is raising them.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for them for that. But at the same time, if anything, if we can be the example by being the bad example, which that is my story. I'm the oldest of 10 kids, right? None of them followed my footsteps, thankfully. But I think I was that example of like, this is what you don't do.
Yeah.
Right. And so it kind of like goes in line with my life at least. But I'm just glad that they're smart enough to pick up like, okay, we don't want to do that.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful thing even in relation to, your life story, because as much as we all have probably had things that have occurred in our lives that aren't the most reflective or the best parts of us, is that even through those bad moments that they can still be used for good if we aren't afraid to be able to share our story in a sense. And so I think like, as much as you've been open about, things that you've encountered and having a certain background, I believe that your story ultimately will help someone else that might potentially consider a certain thing or just help them prevent from going in that direction, altogether.
Yeah.
Because we all need to get to a place where we aren't ashamed of sharing our story.
Yeah.
I think too many of us run around portraying a certain image on social media as if we are the best thing, since sliced bread. But then when it comes down to it, like we're all dealing with some of the same things, maybe your struggle is not the same as my struggle, but somebody else has the same struggle as I've had. Mm-hmm. And so if I can open up about that and even, even be transparent enough to say, well, I might still be dealing with that struggle, that will allow somebody else to be able to say, hey, let me open up about mine or seek getting help and this and that. Because if not, then that's when we deal with the isolation and everything that comes along with keeping those things in. Because from a spiritual place, I believe that the objective of the enemy is to take us out of here. Like he doesn't want you on this earth. Because there is a purpose that God has for you on the inside of you. Like there's a purpose that you're supposed to fulfill while you're here. And if you're dead prematurely, you can't fulfill that purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think that becomes the downfall and not to speak ill against anybody that's, unalived themselves, prior, but I think it gets to the point where it becomes all consuming and it just overwhelms them to the point where they don't see the value of themselves. Mm-hmm. No different than I've had those thoughts. Now, like I was at the VA a few weeks ago, and of course they always ask those same questions, to every veteran that comes in. And so, she asked me the question, and I think the week prior I was having a bad week. I was just having these moments where my emotions were up and down and those suicidal thoughts that came back for whatever reason. Now, for myself, is I'm honest enough to be able to share that with the nurse practitioner at the time. The next question is always, okay, well, did you do this or did you take the next step into, grabbing your weapon? And so I would always say no, because for myself is the overwhelming thought might come, but I've learned how to, when that feeling comes, is I try my best to be able to start doing some things that, I know it's
healthy coping.
Exactly. Because if not, and I sit there in that thought and I allow it to permeate and just get the best of me and then I start really feeling bad, who's to say that I wouldn't do it?
You know who Dr. Shaw is?
No. Okay. You say Dr. Shaw?
Yeah. Mm-mm. Yeah. Dr. Shaw. He's, in my opinion, he's kind of a big deal around here.
Okay.
But he's a neurologist, but he's also in recovery and an addiction medicine specialist. So what he says is, a thought supercharged by an emotion is dangerous.
Absolutely.
Right? When you can arrest the thought before, or when you can properly regulate your emotion, any thought that you have, that is all that it is a thought, right? But you supercharge it by an emotion, and that's when, and men who cannot control their emotions will be controlled by their emotions.
Absolutely will.
And those are truly dangerous men.
Yeah.
Because I always forget that guy's name, but he's like this old grizzled cowboy looking dude, and he does these like hour-long podcasts about like masculinity, right? And he's got like this giant beard, and he sits on this like in this rocking chair with like a glass of like tea, and like it's like very, very, like you could tell this is his life, but if it wasn't, this would be like a perfect like representation of what people would think of like a healthy cowboy is, right?
Right, for sure.
But he always says, like, he talks a lot about masculinity, and one of the things that he says is like, somebody asked him like, what do you wish women knew about men? And he says, I wish they knew that we had 10,000 things going on in our head all at once when they might only have a couple. That's
absolutely the truth.
Right?
And like I feel literally like every single, people ask me what's on my mind, and I'm like, you really just don't want to know, because my mind is just constantly, and I think that becomes a theme with us as men, is that that most women won't really recognize, is that not that they're not dealing with their own things as well, but like as men, it's almost like the weight of the world is on our shoulders in a sense. And so it's just constantly just thoughts here. And so that always, it takes me back to a scripture in the Bible that talks about bringing like our thoughts into subjection. And if you don't bring that thought into subjection, then it has the ability or the capability to do some damage.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that damage could be you not being here. So, like the way that you just put it, I like how it's like a thought that it's supercharged with emotion. It's just like it could be the very thing that like takes you out of this place. Yeah. And if you don't grasp it, the moment that you recognize it, you're in a dangerous place. And then that brings me to another point: is that we have to pay attention to what we're feeding ourselves.
Of course.
So, even in those moments, like we have to recognize, like music is a beautiful thing, but sometimes music can be the most detrimental thing if we're listening to the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yeah.
If we're going through something and we're listening to something that has lyrics that are charged with keeping us in that emotional state.
Yeah. Music is an interesting one. Food and music, right? Like if this is a machine, like when you think about a car, like if you put the wrong octane gas in there, you can ruin your engine.
Yeah.
Like when you put the wrong substances or the wrong fuel or the wrong anything into this, you can fuck it up.
Yeah.
And so music is an interesting one, because when I entered recovery and like got serious about it, I had to stop listening to rap. Right. I had to, because just the influence that it had on my life. Yeah. And then the places that I had been and the things that I had done and the people I'd associated with, it wasn't a healthy thing for me to continue to put that into my mind.
Correct.
Food, when it came to food and exercise, changed the trajectory of my recovery, right? I wasn't conscious about like my food. I wasn't conscious about like my physical machine. And I entered recovery and I was miserable. Like I was miserable. It was bad. And then I met my mentor, ex-Navy SEAL, like this whole thing. And he was like, dude, what are you doing? Like why? Like, and now when I look back on it, I'm like, it just makes so much sense. Yeah. Why didn't I do it? It's like, ultimately I found out I hate going to the gym.
Yeah.
So I built a gym in my garage, right? But I hate going to the gym because of comparison. Like, I don't like comparing myself to other people. So he goes, look, quit doing everything that you're doing. Like whenever you go somewhere and you feel miserable and then you leave and you feel more miserable, stop doing that.
Yeah.
And go to the gym and pay attention to your just basic things. Like pay attention to your macros and just track it and see what like you learn about yourself. And I learned really quickly, like, oh, I'm putting trash into my body. I'm not taking care of it. Like all of these things feed into like how you feel at the end of the day. And so, I started working out, started eating better, stopped doing things that made me feel like shit. And I was like, oh, okay, this is good.
And then once you start seeing like the results of how you feel in those moments, it becomes a thing where I think that propels you to even want to do it even more, because you start seeing like, man, like I don't, when you're in that state of like not taking care of yourself, you get complacent and you remain there. But then once you start seeing the good and the byproducts of like really just being intentional about taking care of your mental and your physical and everything, and how it all like ties into one another. Like there are many times that I will, I'll just do a hard fast, and not for the purpose of health reasons, but I believe that many times a fast is kind of like a spiritual reset that ultimately does affect the natural, and that's a byproduct of it. But it's many times it's to silence yourself, and at the same time to starve yourself so you can get to a place of like central balance.
Yeah, I mean the base human, it needs food to work. Like the machine needs fuel, right? And so my mentor, he always says, like, when you fast, you suffer. When you suffer, you are just by nature of it closer to God.
Yeah.
Just period. That's the way it is. Like, the only way to get as close as possible to God is to suffer through it.
Yeah.
And you look at, like, historically what happened with the apostles and like with Jesus and like even like these monks that like go out there and like they do these crazy meditations for days and days and days. They're not eating and stuff like that. They're getting closer spiritually to whatever it is that they identify with. But it's only possible like through this door.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's an interesting thing, like the whole fasting intention, because there's unintentional. Dude, I went years without eating.
Yeah.
You know, like there was nothing intentional about it. It was buy food or buy drugs. And I was buying drugs. Yeah. And so, but intentionally doing this for like a reason, dude, it
taps you into a completely different space. And so like the older that I've gotten, because, you know, growing up, you know, again in the church, it was something that we did. And so keep in mind, you know, I'm 13 fasting, you know, and there were time periods where we did the sun up to sundown. But then it became more significant as I became older because, of course, you now experience life, the ups and downs and everything, and then you see how, you know, it can be. And I realized, I'm like, okay, well, this is what I need to do in order to allow my spirit man to get back in tune with God. And so I honestly believe that, you know, it's something that, you know, we should all try to even practice, even if we're doing it once a week or, you know, every other week, whatever it might be, because it just, once we can recognize that this flesh isn't, I mean, the flesh is the real us in a sense. It's technically us, but it's just a temporary housing because when we leave this earth, our spirit man is still going to exist. And the thing is, we sense that there's more than our flesh. That's the reason why when we talk about our mind, our our will and our intellect and our emotions and all those, like God designed just this world and us as human beings in such an intricate way. But we have to learn, we have to get back to a place where we recognize that it's just not this. Yeah. Because we live in this natural existence, we get caught up in believing and thinking that everything that we're seeing is just what it is. But we have to also be mindful of the fact that there's something going on in the spiritual world long before it's ever happened in the natural. Yeah. It's kind of like the idea of, you know, like even like with me as a chef, creating a recipe, like before I actually make it manifest or whatever, it starts here with a thought. So it's kind of like the same idea of God speaking the world into existence in a sense. It started somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I first heard the term animating force, I was like, oh yeah, okay, for sure. Like, because before that it was like conceptually like, okay, there's a spirit, there's a body, they come together, I'm alive. And that made sense. But then when somebody said it like, oh, you're animating force, I was like, that makes just the most sense, right? And then like you think about,
I haven't heard that term. Break that down.
That your spirit is your animating force.
Got you.
Absent the spirit, there is no life.
Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah. And so, when he like broke that down, I was like, okay, the animating force is eternal. Yeah. Right. There is no energy is forever. Yeah. Right. And so when you think about it that way, it's like kind of easy to scientifically put it together. But when you think about your spirit as the animating force, where it's like, and this kind of goes into like the whole abortion thing, right? Like where when you can directly correlate movement of the body with an animating force, then that fetus is alive. Mm-hmm. It has an animating force from like the second it's conceived. Right. Right. And so probably get canceled for that someday, but
yeah, that's a topic that I'm sure, you know.
But right, it's like
true, very true.
With like absent spirit, there is no life. Yeah. It just how else does that make sense? Yeah. It doesn't make sense any other way. Yeah. Because I mean, when people die, that is absent the animating force.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when people are alive, that is like, you know, I could get lost in the abortion hole all day, I guess, but I don't know. It's people think that it's funny when I watch people try to arrive at spiritual concepts logically, which it isn't mutually exclusive. You can come to a lot of spiritual conclusions logically. It tracks a lot of it. Now there's like this percentage of it where it's really kind of between you and God. Yeah. Right? Like, because I I've had I've had like the burning of the bosom at a Metallica concert, right? And you could line up 100 different people that have 100 different religions, and they'll all swear that they're in the right religion. Yeah. It's because of that subjective piece where it's like all of us have had these experiences that point to the truthfulness of whatever it is that we believe in.
Yeah.
And it's the same with a lot of things. I feel like we believe in a lot more than people realize. There's a lot of faith involved in walking out your front door.
Yeah. I always say that, it's like no different than me sitting in this chair, or, we exhibit or display a lot more faith than what we recognize, because we don't automatically, when we get ready to sit down in the chair, stop and check and make sure all the bolts and everything or whatever are tight.
Right.
We just trust the fact that we look at the chair, unless we see one where it looks rickety, then we make the decision because we know we'll fall. But when we naturally sit down in the chair, we believe that chair is going to hold us up.
Yeah.
So that's already showing you that we have faith already. It's just that's something that we see, but we still don't know for a fact that it's going to hold us up. So I think, he's given us all that measure of faith. It's just the fact that how are we all utilizing it and operating it in our lives? It's, some are utilizing it more than others because, the idea comes and then they will step out in faith in a sense, and whatever that idea or business idea might be or creative concept is, and then they give life to it, or they birth it by now saying, I'm going to take what I believe that I've seen on the inside and make it real. And then you have some that will, like myself, there are so many different ideas and concepts, but then sometimes, you're afraid to be able to do it, and you never put it out there, or eventually you do, and then you start working it, and then it starts developing and growing. But until we can actually put it out there and start working it, it's kind of like the scripture goes back to saying faith without works is dead. It's like I can say all day long, I believe, God, you're going to bless me with a job, and but if I never actually fill out a physical application or get online and apply, that job isn't going to manifest itself. I don't care how strong your faith is.
Yeah, I used to tell people, so I ended up in treatment for 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like I was in a residential for 3 years straight because I robbed this bank to escape it, like the consequences. Anyway, I ended up at this Bible camp, and I was there for so long, I ended up working for them. And I was a supervisor of a fire mitigation team.
Yeah.
And part of that was I had to lead Bible studies. And at the time I was an atheist, but I had been raised in a very, very Christian home.
Right.
And so I knew the language, all that stuff. And I used to tell people, like, and these are, they're accessing a level of care that kind of indicates that they have nothing, right? And so I used to tell people, you can't just pray to God and sit on your couch and be like, God, please give me a job and give me a wife and let me have this car and let me have this house and and expect that you're gonna just hear a knock at the door one day and be like, who is it? Good job, right?
I always say, the way I always put it is that it's not, this is because Tyler Perry movies are always just, the husband shows up or this. I say a husband or a wife ain't gonna just show up like in a Tyler Perry movie. So, you still got to go out and meet and mingle or do whatever. Even if you got to get on the dating website and swipe, you got to do something, so. Oh, that time went by fast.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to My Last Relapse. I'm Matt Handy, the founder of Harmony Grove Behavioral Health, Houston, Texas, where our mission is to provide compassionate, evidence-based care for anyone facing addiction, mental health challenges, and co-occurring disorders. Find out more at harmonygrovebh.com. Follow and subscribe to My Last Relapse on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you like to stream podcasts. Got a question for us? Leave a message or voicemail at mylastrelapse.com. If you're feeling overwhelmed or struggling, you don't have to face it alone. Reaching out for support is a sign of strength, and help is always available. If you or anyone you know needs help, give us a call 24 hours a day at 888-691-8295.